The dusty bottle washed up on the banks of the Rio Grande, just as Logan Young dismounted his horse to let the animal drink, its green glass catching the harsh Texas sunlight in a way that made him squint and wonder how long it had been traveling downriver. He was 24 years old, a ranch hand who had seen enough of life to be cynical about most things. But something about that bottle called to him with a voice he could not ignore. His calloused fingers pulled the cork free, and inside he found a letter written in delicate script that seemed entirely out of place in the brutal landscape of southern Colorado territory in the spring of 1878. The letter began without preamble, as though the writer had been in the middle of a conversation with herself and decided to include the world in her thoughts. "My name is Margaret Rose, and I am writing this from Rico, a mining town high in the San Juan Mountains where the air is thin and hope is thinner. I am 22 years old, and I feel as though I have lived 1,000 lives already, none of them my own. My father brought me here 3 years ago when silver was discovered, and now he is gone, taken by a cave-in that the mine owners said was an act of God rather than their negligence. I work in the boarding house owned by Mrs. Thornton, cooking and cleaning for men who look through me as though I am made of the same mountain mist that rolls through these peaks each morning. I write this letter not knowing if anyone will ever read it, but I have learned that sometimes hope needs to be set free rather than kept locked inside where it withers and dies. If you are reading this, know that somewhere in the world there is a woman who believes that kindness still exists, that honor means something, that a person's word can still be their bond. I threw this bottle into the creek that feeds into larger waters, and perhaps it will find its way to someone who understands what it means to dream of a better life. Perhaps you are that person. Perhaps not. Either way, I have said what needed saying, and that will have to be enough." Logan read the letter 3 times standing there by the river, his horse forgotten, the sun moving across the sky unnoticed. There was something in those words that reached into his chest and grabbed hold of something he had thought long dead. He had been drifting since his parents died of fever 2 years back, working ranch to ranch across Texas and New Mexico territory, saving money with no particular goal in mind beyond simple survival. But now he had a purpose, foolish though it might be. He would find Margaret Rose of Rico, Colorado territory, and he would discover if the woman who wrote those words was real or just another pretty dream that would dissolve in the harsh light of reality. He rolled up his bedding that evening and told the foreman at the ranch near Del Rio that he was moving on. The man did not seem surprised. Cowboys were wanderers by nature, and Logan had already stayed longer than most. He drew his wages, bought supplies in town, and pointed his horse north as the sun rose the next morning, the letter tucked safely in his shirt pocket where he could feel it against his heart. The journey from southern Texas to the San Juan Mountains of Colorado territory was not one to be undertaken lightly. Logan knew he faced at least 3 weeks of hard riding, probably longer given the terrain and the unpredictable weather of early spring. He traveled through the vast emptiness of West Texas, where the land stretched out flat and brown in every direction, broken only by the occasional mesa or the dark line of mountains far to the north. He crossed into New Mexico territory near El Paso, following established trails where he could, cutting cross-country when it seemed safe enough. The nights were cold despite the warming days, and he spent them wrapped in his bedroll under stars so bright and numerous they seemed to press down from above. He thought about the letter, about Margaret Rose, about what kind of woman would put her hopes in a bottle and trust them to the current. He thought about what he would say when he found her, how he would explain that he had traveled hundreds of miles because of words written to no one in particular. It seemed romantic in the abstract, but the more he considered it, the more foolish it felt. She might be married by now. She might have left Rico. She might think him insane for making such a journey, but still he rode north. He passed through Albuquerque, a sprawling town that was part Mexican, part American, entirely its own creature. He resupplied there, buying grain for his horse and hardtack for himself, coffee and beans and bacon. The shopkeeper was a talkative man who wanted to know where Logan was headed, and when he mentioned Rico, the man whistled low. "That is hard country up there," the shopkeeper said, his accent carrying the musical lilt of Spanish underneath the English words. "The mountains are not forgiving, and the mining towns are full of men who have forgotten what it means to be civilized. You have business there." "I am looking for someone," Logan said, not wanting to explain further. "A woman, I would guess from the look in your eyes," the shopkeeper said with a knowing smile. "Well, I hope she is worth the journey, my friend. That is not an easy road you have chosen." Logan continued north through New Mexico territory, following the Rio Grande through increasingly mountainous terrain. The landscape changed day by day, the flat plains giving way to foothills, the foothills rising into genuine mountains covered with pine and aspen. The air grew thinner and colder. Snow still capped the highest peaks, and he saw herds of elk grazing in the meadows, their antlers like bare trees against the green grass. He crossed into Colorado territory in early April, the weather turning fickle and dangerous. One day would be clear and warm, the next would bring sleet or snow that turned the trails into rivers of mud. His horse struggled with the altitude, and Logan found himself short of breath when he pushed too hard. He was a Texas boy, born and raised in flat country, and these mountains were beyond anything he had experienced before. He stopped at a trading post run by a weathered man named Cortez, who had a Ute wife and a brood of children who watched Logan with curious dark eyes. Over a meal of venison stew, Logan asked about Rico. "It is another 2 days north and west," Cortez told him. "Follow the creek upstream until you reach the Dolores River, then follow that into the mountains. The town sits at about 10,000 feet, maybe higher. They found silver there a few years back, and people rushed in like ants to honey. Now the easy pickings are gone and only the serious miners remain. It is a rough place, but there are good people there too if you know where to look. You know a woman named Margaret Rose?" Logan asked, feeling foolish even as the words left his mouth. Cortez shook his head. "I know many people who pass through here, but that name does not sound familiar. Though in a mining town, people come and go like the seasons. She may be there, she may not. You will have to see for yourself." Logan set out the next morning, following the directions Cortez had given him. The trail wound through valleys so beautiful they made his throat tighten, past waterfalls that thundered down from impossible heights, through groves of aspen whose white trunks glowed in the morning light. He saw bear tracks in the mud and heard wolves howling at night, reminders that this was wild country where nature still held dominion. Rico appeared before him on a gray afternoon when clouds hung low over the peaks and threatened rain. The town was larger than he had expected, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles to a ship's hull. Mine entrances pocked the slopes above the town, and he could hear the distant sound of machinery and blasting even from a mile away. A main street ran through the center of town, lined with the usual establishments: saloons, general stores, a hotel, a blacksmith, a church with a white steeple that seemed optimistic given the rough nature of the populace. Logan rode down that street slowly, aware of eyes watching him from doorways and windows. Strangers were common enough in mining towns, but they were also viewed with suspicion until they proved themselves one way or another. He stopped in front of a building with a sign that read Thornton's Boarding House, and sat for a moment, his heart suddenly pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. This was it. This was the moment when his romantic quest would either prove worthwhile or reveal itself as the foolish fancy of a lonely cowboy who should have known better. He dismounted and tied his horse to the rail, then climbed the steps to the front porch. The door was unlocked, opening into a front hall that smelled of cooking meat and fresh bread. A woman emerged from a side room, elderly and sharp-eyed, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "We have rooms available if you need one," she said without preamble. $2 a night includes breakfast and supper. You want a bath, that is another 50 cents. "Are you Mrs. Thornton?" Logan asked. "I am. Who is asking?" "My name is Logan Young, and I am looking for someone who I believe works here. A woman named Margaret Rose. Mrs. Thornton's expression shifted from businesslike to guarded in an instant. "What is your business with Margaret?" Logan pulled the letter from his pocket, the paper now soft from being handled so many times. "I found this in a bottle, down in Texas. I have traveled here to meet the woman who wrote it." Mrs. Thornton took the letter and read it slowly, her lips moving slightly with the words. When she finished, she looked up at Logan with an expression he could not quite read. "You came all the way from Texas because of this letter?" "Yes, madam. That is either the most romantic thing I have ever heard or the most foolish. I have not decided which yet." She handed the letter back. "Margaret is out at the moment, running errands in town. She should be back within the hour. You can wait in the parlor if you like, or take a room and clean up first. You look like you have been on the trail for some time." "I will wait, if that is all right." Mrs. Thornton showed him to a small parlor with worn furniture and lace curtains on the windows. "I will bring you coffee." "And Mr. Young, Margaret is a good girl who has had more than her share of hardship. If you are here to cause trouble or break her heart, you will answer to me. Am I clear?" "Yes, madam. I have no intention of causing any harm. We will see." Logan sat in the parlor drinking strong coffee and trying to calm his nerves. What would she look like? What would he say? The letter had given him a sense of her character, but that was different from meeting someone in the flesh. He stood and paced, then sat again, then stood once more. He was looking out the window when he saw her. She came walking up the street carrying a basket, her dark hair pulled back but with wisps escaping around her face. She wore a simple dress of blue calico, and there was something in the way she carried herself that spoke of quiet dignity despite the plainness of her appearance. She was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of beauty that grew on you rather than announcing itself, and Logan felt his mouth go dry as he watched her climb the steps to the boarding house. The front door opened and closed. He heard voices in the hall, Mrs. Thornton's low murmur, and then a lighter voice asking a question. Footsteps approached the parlor, and then she was standing in the doorway, looking at him with wide brown eyes that held both curiosity and caution. "Mrs. Thornton says you have traveled from Texas to see me," Margaret said. Her voice was soft but steady, matching the tone of the letter. "She says you found a letter I wrote." Logan nodded, suddenly unable to remember any of the speeches he had prepared during the long journey. "I did. I found it in a bottle on the Rio Grande, and I read it, and I knew I had to find you." "That is a long way to come for a stranger. You did not feel like a stranger when I read your words." Margaret stepped into the room, and Mrs. Thornton appeared behind her like a protective shadow. "May I see the letter?" Logan handed it to her, and she read it with an expression that shifted from surprise to something that might have been embarrassment or perhaps wonder. I wrote this almost 6 months ago. I was in a dark place then, and I thought putting my feelings into words and sending them away might help. I never imagined anyone would actually find it, let alone come looking for me. But I did find it, and I did come looking. I know this must seem strange, maybe even frightening. I am not here to impose myself on you or make demands. I just wanted to meet the woman who wrote those words, who believed in kindness and honor even when life had given her every reason not to. I wanted to know if she was real. Margaret looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. I am real. Though I am not sure I am as good or as hopeful as that letter might suggest. I was writing to an imaginary audience, putting my best self on paper because my real self was too tired and sad to acknowledge. I think that version of you is just as real as any other, Logan said. Maybe more real because you wrote it when you had no reason to lie or pretend. Mrs. Thornton cleared her throat. Margaret, I will be in the kitchen if you need me. Mr. Young, you behave yourself. Yes, madam. When they were alone, Margaret sat down in one of the chairs and gestured for Logan to do the same. Tell me about yourself. If I am going to talk to a man who rode hundreds of miles because of a letter, I should at least know something about him. So Logan told her. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about losing his parents to fever and the hollow emptiness that had followed. He told her about drifting from job to job, good at the work but never feeling settled, always searching for something he could not name. He told her about finding the bottle, reading her letter and making the decision to come north. I know it sounds mad, he said, and maybe it is. But I have spent 2 years feeling like I was sleepwalking through life, and your letter woke me up. It reminded me that there are still good people in the world, still things worth believing in. I had to meet you, had to know if that feeling was real or just wishful thinking on my part. Margaret listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. My father was a good man who made bad decisions. He brought me here chasing silver, convinced we would strike it rich and return to Missouri in triumph. Instead, he died in a mine collapse, and I was left alone in a town where women are scarce and usually expected to make their living in ways I refuse to consider. Mrs. Thornton gave me work when I needed it most, and I have been here ever since, cooking and cleaning and trying to save enough money to leave. Where would you go? I do not know. Somewhere greener, somewhere lower, somewhere that feels less like the edge of the world. But wanting to leave and being able to leave are different things. I make enough to survive, but not enough to start over somewhere else. What if you had help? Logan asked, the words coming out before he fully thought them through. What kind of help? I have saved almost $200 from ranch work. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to make a start somewhere. What if we left here together, found a place where we could build something? Margaret stared at him. You are proposing we run off together. We have known each other for less than an hour. I know it sounds insane, but I did not ride all this way just to turn around and leave. I came here because I felt something when I read your letter, a connection I cannot explain. And sitting here talking to you, I feel it even stronger. Tell me you do not feel it too, and I will walk away. But if there is even a chance you feel the same, then why should we not see where it leads? Margaret stood and walked to the window, her back to him. Logan watched her shoulders rise and fall with her breathing, waiting for her answer, aware that his entire future hung on her next words. I do feel something, she said quietly. I have felt it since I walked into this room and saw you standing there. It terrifies me. I do not know you. You could be anyone, could be lying about everything. And yet part of me wants to say yes, wants to trust that the universe sent you here for a reason. I am not lying, Logan said. Everything I have told you is the truth, and I am not asking you to run off with me tonight. Stay here, let me find work in town, give us time to know each other properly. If after a month or two you still feel we should go our separate ways, I will accept that. But give us a chance." Margaret turned from the window. "Mrs. Thornton will not approve, Mrs. Thornton strikes me as a practical woman. If I prove myself trustworthy and work hard, she will come around. You are very confident. I am determined. There is a difference." A small smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth, the first he had seen from her. "All right, Logan Young from Texas. You can stay in Rico and court me properly. But I warn you, I am not easily won, and this town will test you in ways you cannot imagine." "I did not ride all this way for something easy," Logan said. He took a room at the boarding house and spent the next day asking around town about work. Mining was the main industry, but Logan knew nothing about working underground and had no desire to learn. He had seen what mines did to men, had read about Margaret's father dying in a collapse. Instead, he found work at the livery stable, helping care for horses and mules, repairing tack, and doing the 100 small tasks that kept such a business running. The pay was not generous, but it was steady, and the work was something he understood. In the evenings, he returned to the boarding house where Margaret served supper to the residents, a collection of miners and merchants who eyed Logan with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. He sat at the long table and ate stew or beans or whatever Mrs. Thornton had prepared, and afterward he would sit in the parlor with Margaret if she had time, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved books but had little opportunity to read them in Rico, that she missed the green landscape of Missouri, that she could sew and knit, and had once dreamed of opening a dress shop. She learned that he could play the harmonica, that he had a weakness for apple pie, that he had once broken his arm falling off a horse, and had said it himself because the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away. They were small details, the building blocks of knowing another person, but each one felt precious to Logan. He was learning who Margaret Rose truly was beyond the letter, and everything he discovered made him more certain that he had been right to come here. Mrs. Thornton watched their courtship with a critical eye, but as the days turned into weeks and Logan proved himself reliable and respectful, she softened. One evening she pulled him aside in the kitchen. "You are different from most of the men who come through here," she said. "You actually listen when Margaret speaks, treat her like a person rather than a pretty decoration. I appreciate that." "She deserves to be listened to," Logan said. "She is one of the smartest people I have ever met." "Smart does not keep you warm at night or put food on the table." "What are your intentions toward her, Mr. Young? And I want a straight answer." "I intend to marry her if she will have me," Logan said. "And then I intend to take her away from this town to somewhere she can build the life she deserves. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly." "I know that, madam. But I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about Margaret. I would spend the rest of my life trying to make her happy." Mrs. Thornton studied him for a long moment. "I believe you mean that. Very well. You have my blessing to propose, though the decision is hers to make. And Mr. Young, if you break her heart, I will hunt you down myself. I would expect nothing less." Logan waited until the first week of June, when the snow had finally melted from all but the highest peaks and wildflowers covered the meadows in riots of color. He asked Margaret to take a walk with him after supper, and she agreed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. They walked out of town along a path that followed the creek, the water running fast and cold with snowmelt. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Logan had never seen anything so beautiful, except for the woman walking beside him. "Margaret," he said, stopping beside a grove of aspens whose leaves rustled in the breeze. "I know we have only known each other for 2 months, but they have been the best 2 months of my life. You are everything your letter promised and more. You are kind and strong and smart, and you make me want to be a better man than I am." "Logan," she said softly, but he pressed on. "I am not a rich man, and I cannot promise you an easy life. But I can promise that I will work hard every day to provide for you, that I will treat you with respect and kindness, that I will be faithful and true. Margaret Rose, will you marry me?" She looked at him with eyes that glistened with tears. "You really mean it, every word?" "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Logan pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time, her lips soft and warm against his. She kissed him back, and it felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding something precious he had not known he was missing. They were married 2 weeks later in the little church with the white steeple. Mrs. Thornton stood up with Margaret, and the blacksmith, a kind man named Henderson who had become friendly with Logan, stood up with him. The preacher was a circuit rider who happened to be passing through Rico, and he performed the ceremony with genuine warmth and blessing. Margaret wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Mrs. Thornton had given her as a wedding gift, pale yellow with lace at the collar and cuffs. Logan wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but were clean and carefully mended. They spoke their vows in front of the small congregation, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived, and Logan meant every word with his entire heart. After the ceremony, Mrs. Thornton hosted a small celebration at the boarding house with cake and coffee, and well wishes from the townspeople who had come to know and like the young couple. Logan and Margaret danced to music from a fiddle player, moving awkwardly because neither was particularly skilled, but laughing and happy in each other's arms. That night, they consummated their marriage in Logan's small room at the boarding house, coming together with a mixture of nervousness and desire that transformed into something deeper and more profound. Logan had been with women before, but this was different. This mattered in a way those other encounters never had. This was making love rather than simply satisfying physical need, and when they lay together afterward, Margaret's head on his chest and his arms around her, he felt a peace he had never known before. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for finding my letter. Thank you for coming for me. I would cross 100 more miles to find you again." They stayed in Rico for another month while Logan worked extra hours and saved every penny he could. They talked about where to go, eventually deciding on the San Luis Valley on the eastern side of the mountains. It was lower in elevation, with better soil for farming and ranching, and several people in Rico had spoken well of it. In mid-July, they loaded their belongings onto a wagon Logan had bought from a miner who was leaving town, said goodbye to Mrs. Thornton with promises to write, and set out on the long journey across the mountains. The trip was difficult, the passes high and treacherous, but they traveled together, and that made all the difference. At night, they camped under the stars, and Logan would play his harmonica while Margaret sang in a clear, sweet voice that made his heart swell. They came down out of the mountains into the San Luis Valley on a morning when the sun was just rising over the Sangre de Cristo Range to the east. The valley spread before them like a promised land, vast and green and beautiful. A river ran through it, and farms and ranches dotted the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys into the clean morning air. They found a small piece of land for sale outside a town called Alamosa, 40 acres with a creek running through it, and a small cabin that needed work, but was structurally sound. Logan used most of their savings as a down payment. shaking hands with the seller and signing papers that made him a landowner for the first time in his life. The cabin had 2 rooms and a fireplace, with a loft where they could store goods and eventually put children if they were blessed with any. Margaret scrubbed it from top to bottom while Logan repaired the roof and chinked gaps in the walls. They bought a milk cow and some chickens, planted a vegetable garden, and slowly began to build their life together. It was hard work, harder than anything Logan had done before. The altitude was lower than Rico, but still high enough to make the growing season short. They learned by trial and error what would grow and what would not, fighting frost and drought and insects. But they learned together, and each small success felt like a victory. Logan found work on neighboring ranches during cattle drives and roundups, bringing in money to supplement what they could grow. Margaret sold eggs and vegetables in town, and her sewing skills were much appreciated by local women who gladly paid for well-made clothes and alterations. Their first winter together was brutal, with snow piling up to the windows and temperatures that dropped so low the water in their basin froze solid overnight. They spent those long dark months huddled close to the fire, reading aloud from the few books they owned, talking about their dreams for the future, making love under layers of quilts and buffalo robes. When spring came, Margaret told him she was pregnant. Logan was working in the garden when she gave him the news, his hands deep in the soil, planting potatoes. She came out of the cabin and simply said, "We are going to have a baby." He stood up so fast he nearly lost his balance, his heart suddenly racing. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. The signs are all there." Logan crossed the garden in 3 strides and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and told him to put her down before he made her dizzy. He set her on her feet and kissed her, tasting salt from happy tears he had not realized he was crying. "We are going to have a baby," he repeated, as though saying it would make it more real. "We are. In the fall, if I am calculating correctly. I am going to be a father. And I am going to be a mother. Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Logan said. "I am terrified and excited and grateful all at once. I promise you, Margaret, I will take care of you both. I will work harder than I have ever worked. I will make sure you have everything you need." "I know you will," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I trust you completely." The pregnancy was not easy. Margaret suffered from sickness in the mornings that sometimes lasted all day, and there were times when she was so exhausted she could barely stand. But she never complained, and Logan did everything he could to ease her burden. He took over the cooking when the smell of food made her ill, did the washing and cleaning, insisted she rest whenever possible. As summer progressed and her belly began to swell, he found himself overwhelmed with love and protectiveness. He would watch her moving around the cabin, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach, and feel such powerful emotion it nearly brought him to his knees. This woman had written a letter and thrown it into a creek, and somehow it had found its way to him across hundreds of miles and changed his entire life. In late October, on a night when the first snow of the season was falling softly outside, Margaret's labor began. Logan rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife who lived 3 miles away, bringing her back to find Margaret pacing the cabin floor, breathing through contractions that came with increasing frequency. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Garcia, who had delivered half the babies in the valley, took charge with calm efficiency. She sent Logan to boil water and fetch clean linens, giving him tasks to keep him busy while she helped Margaret through the stages of labor. It was the longest night of Logan's life. He heard Margaret cry out in pain, heard the midwife's soothing voice encouraging her to push, heard sounds that made him want to break down the door and do something, anything, to help. But all he could do was wait and pray and trust that everything would be all right. Just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Garcia opened the bedroom door, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Young. A fine, healthy boy with a good set of lungs." Logan rushed into the room to find Margaret propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but smiling, a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with so much love in her eyes that he felt his throat tighten. "Come meet your son," she said. Logan approached slowly, almost afraid to look, and then he was gazing down at the smallest, most perfect human being he had ever seen. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at him with dark blue eyes, one tiny fist pressed against his mouth. "He is beautiful," Logan whispered. "We did this," Margaret said. "We made this perfect little person. What should we call him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Margaret said, "I was thinking Thomas, after my father. Thomas Young." "Thomas," Logan said, testing the name. "I like it. Thomas Young. Welcome to the world, son." He reached down and carefully took the baby from Margaret, cradling the tiny weight in his arms. Thomas made a small sound and shifted, and Logan felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This was his son, his and Margaret's, a new life they had created together out of love. Mrs. Garcia stayed for a few hours to make sure both mother and baby were doing well, then left with Logan's profound thanks and a promise of payment as soon as he could arrange it. When they were alone, Logan climbed carefully into bed beside Margaret, Thomas between them, and they simply looked at their son in wonder. "Can you believe we did this?" Margaret asked. "I can barely believe any of it," Logan said. "A year and a half ago I was alone and drifting, and now I have a wife and a son and a home. You changed my life, Margaret. That letter changed everything." "I am glad I threw it into the creek," she said. "I am glad you found it. I am glad you came for me. So am I. Every single day I am glad." They fell asleep that way, exhausted and happy, their son safe between them. The years that followed were full of the ordinary miracles of family life. Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy toddler with his mother's dark hair and his father's stubborn determination. Logan expanded their land, buying adjacent parcels when he could afford them, building up a small herd of cattle and horses. Margaret's vegetable garden became famous in the area, and she began selling preserves and pickles that women came from miles around to buy. When Thomas was 3 years old, Margaret became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the summer of 1882 she gave birth to a daughter they named Emily. 2 years later came another daughter, Sarah, and then when Sarah was 4, a final son they called Benjamin. The cabin that had seemed adequate when it was just the two of them grew cramped with 4 children. So Logan spent 2 years building a proper house, working on it whenever he had time between ranch duties and caring for his growing family. It was a beautiful house when finished. 2 stories with large windows that let in light, a wide porch where they could sit on summer evenings, and enough bedrooms that each child could have their own space. Margaret filled the house with love and laughter. She taught the children to read and write, to be kind and honest, to work hard and treat others with respect. She sewed their clothes and bandaged their scraped knees, and sang them to sleep with old songs she remembered from her childhood in Missouri. Logan taught them to ride and rope, to care for animals, to understand the land and respect its cycles. He was a patient father who rarely raised his voice but had high expectations for behavior and effort. He loved his children fiercely and made sure they knew it, never hesitating to tell them or show them through his actions. Sometimes, On quiet evenings when the children were in bed, and he and Margaret sat together on the porch watching the stars, he would pull out the letter that had brought them together. It was worn now, the creases deep from being folded and unfolded countless times, the ink faded from years of handling, but he could still read the words that had changed his life. "You ever regret it?" he asked Margaret one such evening, throwing that letter away. "Never," she said without hesitation. "It brought me you. It brought me this life. How could I regret that? I think about the odds sometimes. That bottle could have sunk or been broken on rocks. It could have washed up anywhere along hundreds of miles of river. Someone else could have found it and ignored it, but it found me and I came for you. It was meant to be," Margaret said, taking his hand. "I truly believe that. Some things are simply fate." "I love you," Logan said. "More now than even on the day we married, if that is possible." "It is possible," Margaret said. "Love grows when you feed it, and we have been feeding ours for years." Thomas grew into a serious young man who wanted to study law, so when he turned 18 they sent him to Denver to attend school, proud and terrified in equal measure. Emily proved to have a gift for music, and was teaching piano to children in town by the time she was 16. Sarah was the wild one, always climbing trees and racing horses, challenging her brothers to contests she usually won. Benjamin was still young, only 10 years old, but already showing signs of being the most thoughtful of the children, always reading and asking questions about how things worked. Logan was 42 years old now, his dark hair shot through with gray, his hands scarred and calloused from decades of hard work. Margaret was 40, her face lined but still beautiful to him, her hair worn in a simple bun that made her look like the practical, capable woman she was. They had built a good life together through determination and love, and while it had not always been easy, it had been worth every struggle. One evening in early autumn, when the aspens on the mountainsides were turning gold, and the air had that crisp quality that promised winter to come, Logan and Margaret walked down to the creek that ran through their property. It was the same creek where he had first thought about how Margaret's letter had traveled from the mountains all the way down to the Rio Grande. "You remember what you wrote in that letter?" Logan asked. "About believing that kindness still exists, that honor means something." "I remember," Margaret said. "I was trying to convince myself as much as anyone else. You were right, though. Those things do exist. You proved it by being who you are, and you gave me a chance to prove it too." "We have had a good life, have we not?" Margaret asked. "The best life I could have imagined," Logan said. "Better than I deserved." "You deserve every bit of it," Margaret said firmly. "You are the best man I have ever known, Logan Young. You came for me when you had no reason to, when I was just words on a page. You built this life for us with your own 2 hands. You have been a wonderful husband and father. Do not ever doubt your worth." Logan pulled her close, and they stood there by the creek as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, all those miles across Texas and New Mexico and Colorado, following nothing more than a feeling and a letter from a stranger. It had been the best decision of his life. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every mile, every hardship, everything, if it meant ending up here with you." "I know you would," Margaret said. "That is who you are." They walked back to the house hand in hand as twilight deepened into night. Through the windows they could see their children moving about inside, Emily at the piano, Sarah and Benjamin arguing good-naturedly about something, the warm glow of lamplight making the house look like a haven against the darkness. This was home. This was family. This was love made manifest in wood and stone, and the people who filled it with life. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas returned from Denver with his law degree and opened a practice in Alamosa, defending miners and small farmers against corporations that tried to cheat them. He married a schoolteacher named Alice, and they gave Logan and Margaret their first grandchildren, twin girls with bright red hair and mischievous smiles. Emily married a banker from Denver and moved to the city, but she came home for visits several times a year, always sitting at the old piano and filling the house with music. Sarah shocked everyone by becoming the first female ranch hand hired by the biggest spread in the valley, proving she could work as hard as any man and earning grudging respect from cowboys twice her age. Benjamin went to college to study engineering, writing long letters home about his classes and the incredible things being invented that would change the world. Logan and Margaret grew older together, their hair turning white, their movements slower but their love unchanged. They had been married for 32 years when Logan woke one morning to find Margaret sitting at the kitchen table with tears running down her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. She held up a letter. "Mrs. Thornton died. One of her nephews wrote to tell me. She passed peacefully in her sleep last week." Logan sat down beside her and took her hand. "I am sorry. I know she meant a great deal to you. She gave me a job when I needed it most," Margaret said. "She gave us her blessing when we married. She was like a mother to me after my own mother died. And now she is gone. She lived a good long life," Logan said gently, "and she knew you were happy. We visited her, 5 years ago. She saw our children, saw what we built together. She knew her kindness made a difference. I wish I could have said goodbye." "You can still say it," Logan said. "Death does not stop love or gratitude. She knows. Wherever she is, she knows." Margaret wiped her eyes and nodded. "You are right. I will write to her nephew and make sure he knows how much she meant to me." That evening they held a small memorial service on their porch, just the two of them, toasting Mrs. Thornton's memory with glasses of wine and sharing stories about the formidable woman who had brought them together. It was bittersweet but also comforting, a way to honor someone who had played such an important role in their lives. Logan was 60 years old when his heart first gave him trouble. It happened while he was working with the horses, a sudden tightness in his chest and shortness of breath that made him have to sit down. Margaret insisted the doctor come out from town, and after examining him, the doctor was grave. "Your heart is wearing out, Mr. Young," he said. "It happens as we age, especially to men who have worked as hard as you have. You need to slow down, let others do the heavy work." "I have a ranch to run," Logan protested. "You have 4 grown children who can help," Margaret said firmly, "and hired hands." "You are not doing this alone anymore, Logan. Please. I need you to listen to the doctor." So Logan stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, turning over most of the work to Thomas and Benjamin, who had moved back to the valley after finishing school. It was hard for him, being less active, but he adapted. He spent more time with Margaret, taking slow walks around their land, sitting on the porch watching the mountains, playing with his grandchildren when they came to visit. "I never imagined I would live this long," he told Margaret one afternoon. They were sitting in the garden she had tended for so many years, the vegetables growing in neat rows, the flowers she had planted over the years blooming in every color imaginable. "You have years left in you yet," Margaret said. "Maybe. Maybe not. But either way, I have no complaints. I've had more happiness than most men get in 10 lifetimes." "We both have," Margaret agreed. "Though I would like many more years with you if the universe is willing. I plan to stick around and bother you for as long as possible," Logan said with a smile. He made it another 8 years, dying peacefully at age 68 with Margaret holding his hand and all 4 of his children gathered around his bed. His last words were to his wife. "Thank you for writing that letter," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for being brave enough to throw it into the water. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. You made my life worth living." "And you made mine," Margaret said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Logan Young. I will love you always." "I love you too," he said. "Wait for me." "I will wait forever if I have to." He closed his eyes then and was gone, slipping away so gently that for a moment Margaret thought he was just sleeping. But then she knew, felt it in her bones, and the grief that washed over her was like nothing she had ever experienced. They buried him on a hill overlooking their land, with a simple stone marker that read Logan Young, 1854–1922. Beloved husband, father, and friend, he came for her and found love. The whole valley turned out for the funeral, hundreds of people whose lives he had touched through his kindness and integrity. Margaret lived another 12 years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and capable until the very end, still tending her garden, still telling stories about the early days in Rico and the cowboy who had traveled across half a territory because of a letter in a bottle. When she died at age 80 in 1934, they buried her beside Logan on the hill. Her stone read Margaret Rose Young, 1856–1934. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. She wrote the letter that changed everything. Their children kept the ranch running for another generation, and then their grandchildren after that. The house Logan built still stood 100 years later, carefully preserved by family members who understood its significance. The letter that had brought Logan and Margaret together was framed and hung in the front hallway, its faded words still legible, a testament to the power of hope and the unexpected ways love can find us. Thomas's great-granddaughter wrote a book about her ancestors' love story, and it became a regional bestseller, inspiring countless readers with the tale of the cowboy who traveled hundreds of miles to find the woman who wrote a letter in a bottle. People started visiting the house and the graves on the hill, leaving flowers and letters of their own, touched by the simple romance of two people who found each other against all odds. The story of Logan and Margaret Young became part of the fabric of the San Luis Valley, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, evolving with each telling but always keeping the essential truth at its heart. That love is worth pursuing, that hope matters, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in the possibility of something better. And somewhere in the vast archive of human stories, their tale lived on, a reminder that even in the hardest places, even in the wildest frontiers, love could bloom and flourish and create something beautiful that would last long after the original lovers were gone. The bottle that had carried Margaret's letter was long lost, probably broken on rocks somewhere along the Rio Grande, but its purpose had been fulfilled beyond anything she could have imagined when she threw it into that mounting creek all those years ago. It had found the one person in all the world who would read those words and recognize them for what they were. Not just a cry into the void, but an invitation to something extraordinary. Logan and Margaret's love story became a legend, but it was a legend rooted in truth, in real people who made real choices and built a real life together. They faced hardships and heartbreaks, celebrated triumphs and joys, and through it all they held on to each other and the love that had brought them together. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the dramatic journey or the romantic gesture of traveling hundreds of miles for a stranger, though those things were certainly part of the story. What mattered was what came after, the daily choice to love each other, to build a life together, to face whatever came with united hearts and steadfast commitment. They had 4 children, 12 grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, and more descendants beyond that, all of them carrying forward the legacy of Logan and Margaret's love. Some became ranchers like their ancestors. Others became lawyers and teachers and engineers and artists, spreading across the country and around the world. But they all knew the story of how their family began, and they all understood the lesson it taught. That love is the greatest adventure of all, and it is always worth pursuing. The San Luis Valley continued to change and grow around the Young ranch, but the land Logan and Margaret had claimed remained in the family, carefully stewarded by each generation. The creek still ran through it, the same creek that connected to the waters that had carried Margaret's letter south. And sometimes on quiet evenings, you could almost feel the presence of the two people who had turned this piece of earth into a home. Their story was simple in its way, just two people who found each other and built a life. But simplicity does not mean insignificance. Every great love story is built from small moments, ordinary days, and the choice to keep showing up for each other no matter what. Logan and Margaret understood that, lived it, and in doing so created something that would outlast them both. The letter Margaret wrote in desperation and hope, the bottle she threw into the creek, the long journey Logan made to find her, all of it was just the beginning. The real story was in the years that followed, the life they built together, the family they raised, the love they shared through decades of joy and sorrow, plenty and want, health and sickness. And in the end, when all was said and done, they had kept every promise they made to each other on that day in the little church in Rico. They had loved and honored each other, in good times and bad, for richer and poorer, in sickness and health, as long as they both lived. It was a life well lived, a love well earned, a story worth telling and retelling for generations to come. And though Logan and Margaret were gone now, their love remained, written not just in that faded letter hanging on the wall, but in every descendant who carried their blood, every acre of the land they had claimed, every story told about the cowboy who found a letter in a bottle and traveled across half a territory to find the woman who wrote it. That was the power of love, the real magic of their story. It did not end when they died. It kept going, kept growing, kept touching lives and inspiring hearts long after they were laid to rest on that hill overlooking the valley they had called home. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when they leave this earth, Logan and Margaret Young were together still, their hands clasped, their hearts united, their love eternal and unending as the mountains themselves.